Hirings and firings in the White House, continued outrage over ethics reform or a lack thereof in Albany, and a race for mayor that's been making daily headlines as of late in Rochester. There's no shortage of political news to discuss this week, so we invited Assembly Majority Leader Democrat Joe Morelle to weigh in. He stopped by the WXXI studios earlier this week to do just that. Take a look. Assemblyman, you have been in politics, and I am not going to age you here, but for more than 3 decades, so we'll say that.
Sounds
aged. But I say all that to say you have been around and you understand the inner workings of politics. You have seen and you have experienced much, the good, the bad, and the ugly. And I want to know, and I really want to get your perspective on the national political landscape right now. Would you say that we are in a good phase, a bad phase, or an ugly phase?
I'd say bad and ugly.
Why?
Not necessarily because, as a Democrat, I'm not crazy about some of the things that the Trump administration has proposed to do. But what troubles me is the sort of the nature of the discourse. It's gotten much more crude. It's gotten, there's no civility left in politics and in government. There's no reaching across the aisle. And even the use of facts or the questioning of truth, or someone who says something now in politics knowing it not to be true, but just sort of writes it off and says, yeah, but it's politics, that's what we do. I think the public, unfortunately, is getting the wrong idea of most of the people who are attracted to government and public service. The vast majority are good, honorable people. They want to do the right thing. And honestly, when you think about sometimes the philosophies between Democrats and Republicans, there is common ground and there is middle ground. And that's what we ought to be seeking, because, people often say, and I think it's right, that neither Democrats nor Republicans have, a monopoly on the truth. And working together and working across party lines usually does lead to better outcomes. We certainly see that in Albany. And Albany gets sort of mixed in with Washington. It's just all politics, nothing good happens. But with a Democratic Assembly and a Republican Senate, nothing can happen in Albany without bipartisanship. And it happens all the time, doesn't get written about very much. People tend to focus on those things that separate us rather than those things that we find common ground on. But in Washington now, and I honestly, I hate to say this, but I think the president deserves blame or credit for what happens in terms of the tone of the debate. And I see too many people now getting into politics who think just rough and tumble, say whatever you want, don't care about your person who you might see as an adversary. And it doesn't lead to good outcomes. My father often said, I'm old school, which is you try to do things the right way. You try to be honorable in what you do. It's something I try to live every day. It's hard sometimes, and you don't always get to be the way you want to be, but you really try to keep that as the sort of value. And I fear that that's going away in Washington. I see it in some degree in Albany as well. And I think that's troubling, because I don't want people to be attracted to sort of the I hate to say glamour, because I don't really know if it's glamour, but the notoriety and who are attracted to the sort of the fight and the how much attention you can get on social media, and the desire that, I just want to be a celebrity. I can't imagine our founding fathers thinking of celebrity as what would attract people to public service. So I think all of us are rightly concerned and troubled by what's going on.
Well, let's focus. You mentioned Albany, so we'll kind of transition to state government and the direct impact on our region. Plenty to discuss there for sure. Yeah. So some of the measures passed by the legislature this year, I'm just going to list a few: raising the age for criminal prosecution of children, legalization of Uber and Lyft, free college tuition for middle-class students to SUNY and CUNY schools, allowing medical marijuana to be prescribed for the treatment of post-traumatic stress disorder, and a bill that gives cancer patients dealing with medical malpractice more time to sue. Those are a few of the things. What is one thing that I left off this list that you would say you were directly involved in that also has a direct impact on those in our region?
The flood recovery efforts. I worked with Senator Helming, and we fashioned a significant recovery relief bill, $45 million for people in our region who are affected by flooding. And that's both homeowners as well as small businesses, as well as the municipalities that are dealing with the after effects, and in some cases the continued impact of flooding along the entire Lake Ontario region all the way up to the St. Lawrence.
I would imagine that your constituents, you heard quite a great deal from them in regards to that in particular.
Yeah, certainly those. It's sort of interesting. This happened during the windstorm as well back in March, is that if you were affected, it was really a significant burden on you and your family. If you weren't, it seemed like almost, if you didn't have a loss of power or you weren't affected by the windstorm, after a couple of days you'd say, well, what's the big deal? It's sort of the same thing. If you're not in an area or a community that's flooded and dealing with the effects of the flooding, you might not realize the hardship that people are still dealing with, but it is significant, and the record rains have contributed significantly to it, as has, there's some dispute about how much the International Joint Commission and Plan 2014 contributed to this. It contributed, the degree to which I think is still up to some debate.
Well, one thing that I'm going to look to the flip side here, a number of bills that were not passed in the legislative session. And I read a report that said while 84 bills were passed this year, more than 500 measures remain untouched. Right. So what does it take to get the legislature to act? And I'm asking this because was this an unusual year? Because you mentioned this bipartisan support that exists in Albany, and some may question that when they hear, my gosh, what happened and why were certain measures not dealt with?
Right. Well, there are about 12,000 bills introduced in the course of the two-year session. You know, one of my primary responsibilities is to try to help winnow that number and sort of identify what are those things that are real priorities, what are those things that have bipartisan and broad support, and which of those items can probably get the approval of the governor, because we have to go through that process. So,
any examples that you would give, that you would say, yes, this I pulled from here, and these are things that we looked at?
Things that we did not do?
Yes.
Oh, there's a number of things that we decided not to do, either because there wasn't broad support, or you're concerned that it isn't fully baked, that there will be unintended consequences, and you're going to want to think about that or reflect on it a little more before you act on it. So we have right now, when I go back in January, the active calendar in the Assembly will be 600 bills that are ready to be considered. Those have all gone through the committee process. They may not have made it out by June, but they're on the cusp of being considered. But sometimes you'll have bills that will pass the Assembly because Democrats support them and the Republicans in the Senate don't, and vice versa. So the real, sort of art of all this is trying to find, as I said, common ground on something that's really important to a broad cross-section of people around the state and that you can agree to.
So I want to ask one thing after the legislative session ended that I still read reports about ethics reform and this question, why has there been no movement on this? And I know that after the ex-Assembly Speaker Sheldon Silver crisis in 2015, you were quoted as saying in an article, ethics reform will happen, it will come to Albany. And we look 2 years later, why are we hearing from people that there's been no real movement, no momentum on this?
Well, actually, I think there was some significant momentum. Two things happened this year that will really, I think, be very meaningful. First is we passed final passage and the voters approved a constitutional amendment to forfeit pensions for anyone who breaks the law in the conduct of their official duties. So that's a brand new thing that was added to the Constitution. The second is we agreed with the Senate to have a new rule that relates to every member in the legislature, that prior to any outside income, you have to get the approval of the Legislative Ethics Commission, who will then research to make sure what you tell them you are doing as outside income doesn't violate any of the public officers laws provisions or anything else that would violate your ability or impede your ability to do your job. So it really is preventive in that whatever you're going to do from an economic point of view, you're going to have to get approval of Legislative Ethics Committee before it happens. So that's really, in my mind, I think people want to see sometimes increased penalties. They want to see a whole host of things, but those are after the fact. What we really want to do is create an environment where the public is certain that the people who are making decisions on things that affect their life are doing so freely, doing so without the benefit of some outside income that they're not aware of. That's clearly what happened in the case of Speaker Silver. But some of the other reason that we haven't gotten an agreement is, I think, fundamentally, the Assembly Democrats, for instance, would like to limit outside income altogether. So say that you could have something like they have the model in Congress, or a number of dollars that you could you'd still have to make sure that they weren't in violation of your public oath, but you'd limit the outside income. The Senate rejects that idea. The Senate would like to do some other things that the Assembly's rejected. So I think sometimes there's just philosophical differences. And I also think this, that if someone goes to their job, whether they're selling cars or whether they're passing legislation or whether they're doing any other kind of work, if in their heart they have a desire to cheat the system, it's awfully hard to get to identify those people in advance. We're working very hard to make sure that we can identify and eliminate conflicts before they happen. But I think at the end of the day, human nature being what it is, you know, it's impossible to consider every situation
when you say you're
before
close,
it happens.
I guess how close? I mean, what does that mean in the grand scheme of things when you're close to identifying some of those things?
Well, in terms of in terms of conflicts,
yeah.
Well, because now the Legislative Ethics Commission would have you write and say, these are the things that I'm involved in. I sell real estate. I teach at a university one course. I do this as an attorney. Well, they're going to ask to describe what kind of activities you do. In some cases, like with attorneys, we require them to disclose who their clients are. So there's a lot more disclosure in advance to try to eliminate potential conflicts before they happen.
Before I let you go, I do have to ask, we've got a race for mayor in the works right now this year. We've got 5 candidates. I've had all 5 on the program, had an opportunity to hear from them. As you've observed the varied campaigns and the platforms, and you follow along in the news of the day in relation to the race, what are your thoughts?
Well, I always want the city and the county and local communities to elect people who, you know, share the values of the public, that are going to work hard, they're going to have the utmost in integrity, that you can rely on in the moment of crisis to make sound decisions, and that will attract good quality people to an administration. So I know the various candidates are out there talking about their views. It's good for Rochester that there's a competitive race. As a former county chairman, I'm glad I'm not there anymore, so I don't have to help referee this. I can just watch and read the newspaper and watch on TV and listen on the radio. But I think it's good for the community, for people with different viewpoints to express their views, and people get an idea on who they want to lead in what is going to be a very difficult series of years, because, you know, support for the federal government is declining. States and the state of New York is going to be challenged economically over the next several years, and this region faces real challenges. So whoever is chosen to lead needs to be the person that the public has the utmost faith can get the job done.
Any one candidate, in your opinion, you believe is better suited to lead?
I'm sort of staying out of
mayoral
politics and watching. They're all friends. I've known each of them in different capacities, and obviously wish them well, and hope. As I have always said, I trust the voters ultimately do the right thing.
Assembly Majority Leader Joe Morelle, it has been too long. I said this before we got started with the interview. I think 4 years. I hope to see you again very soon.
We will make a point of doing that. Thanks for the invitation.
Thank you.
Nice to be here.
For more coverage of state politics, be sure to tune in to WXXI's Capitol Bureau Chief Karen DeWitt on WXXI Radio and online at WXXInews.org. Just click on the Capitol Bureau link for Karen's latest reports.